Alrighty guys, so what we're going to look at is going to build on from last class. So last class we talked about monopolies and perfect competitions, right? So monopolies, again, one seller of a product, think about Georgia Power or that Daraprim drug. Perfect competitions would be like gas stations. Alright, and so let's look at these different characteristics and see which ones we can identify with the perfect competitions and which one would be closer with a monopoly. So first off, if we're looking at having many sellers, right, that would be a perfect competition. If you think about gas stations, right, we've got hundreds of them in Glenn County. So you've got a lot of sellers. All right, so many barriers to entry. All right, this one would generally go with the monopoly, right? So whenever there's only one business in control of a market, usually there's a reason. So for Georgia Power, it's because the state gives them the exclusive right to sell that product. If you're looking at that Daraprim drug, it's because they have a patent on it. If you're looking at that De Beers Diamond Company, they own like 90% of the diamond mines in the world. So because of that, there's always going to be some kind of barriers to entry in a monopoly. So no market power. This means that they have no control over their prices. Well, as we know, monopolies have a lot of control over their prices. Like with that Daraprim drug, they raised the price about 100 times over, whereas with a perfect competition, gas stations generally aren't going to have a lot of control over their prices. So as far as most competitive goes, that would go along with the perfect competition. If you think about that FBLA chocolate sale they do, right, you've got 100 kids all selling the exact same chocolate. So because of that, they don't really have a lot of control over their prices. All right, and finally, selling identical goods, that would again come back to the perfect competition, right? With the FBLA chocolate sale, they all have the Rice Krispie one, they all have the almond one, or the dark chocolate one, and the milk chocolate one. And so they're all selling identical goods, and because of that, again, very little control over their prices. So what we're going to look at today is a little bit more complicated. So the first one we're going to take a look at is monopolistic competition. And so this is like a combination of the two that we've looked at so far. All right, we've got competition, but each of these businesses is going to have a monopoly on a certain type of product. So this is generally what we see in our market, right? If you think about fast food restaurants as a good example here, if you look at, let's say, McDonald's, right? They would have a monopoly on Big Macs. They're the only business that can make a Big Mac. But at the same time, Burger King would have a monopoly on Whoppers. They're the only ones that can make it. All right, Wendy's would have their Baconator. All right, so even though they have a monopoly on that product, they're still close enough to be in competition with one another. And so this is what we call a monopolistic competition. A lot of sellers of slightly differentiated goods. So a few key things we need here to make this work. All right, so first off, all right, we have to have a lot of sellers, right? We've got a lot of fast food places. Secondly, we need low barriers to entry. If I wanted to open up my own fast food place, it would be pretty easy. If you think about Willie's, right, they're able to compete with these other ones. And so they have some control over their prices. They're trying to compete on things other than price. That way they can keep their prices higher, right? So if you look at Chick-fil-A versus Zaxby's or Chick-fil-A versus a McChicken at McDonald's, all right, Chick-fil-A doesn't want to lower down their prices because that means that they would lose out on profit. Instead, they would rather compete on their customer service or the cleanliness of the restaurant or the speed at which they can provide their food. All right, and so they would rather compete on things that aren't prices. That way their profits can stay higher. All right, and another key thing that needs to be true here is that these products are differentiated, right? A Big Mac is different than a Whopper, is different than a Baconator, is different than a Five Guys burger. And so because of that, we're willing to pay different prices for each of these. All right, so this non-price competition is what we were just talking about with the fast food places, right? Or we could look at, like, let's say, clothing companies, right? So some people like Nike, some people like Adidas, some people like Under Armour, some people, they like all of these different types of clothing, and it's for a lot of different reasons. Like, so for me, when it comes to like athletic wear, I feel like Nike stuff fits me a lot better than Under Armour does, and so generally I like to buy that because of the texture, or the shape, or things like that. As far as location goes, I might like the taste of Chick-fil-A, or let's say, Willie's a little bit better, but Five Guys is a lot closer to my house. And so because of that, I might eat there a little bit more because of that. All right, the service level is what we address, like with Chick-fil-A. If they ever get my order wrong, they're always apologetic, and sometimes they even give you a free milkshake or a free fry or something. At McDonald's, I haven't really seen that same level of customer service. With advertising, you can think about shoes as a good example here. So shoe brands would be monopolistic competition. Air Jordans go for a much higher price than other like forms of Nikes and Adidas, not because they're made with higher quality materials, but because of the status that we associate with that. And so because of that, they would be a monopolistic competition as well. So most businesses would honestly be parts of monopolistic competition, because most businesses sell slightly different products from one another. All right, so when we're looking at profit from monopolistic competition, the key thing here is that since they have a high level of competition, they're going to have to keep their prices low. And so because they don't want to lower down their prices too much, they're going to want to compete on other things, usually the service or the quality or the advertising, things like that, because they know that if they raise their prices too much, people are going to go elsewhere, right? As much as I love Willie's, if they charge $15 for a meal there, I wouldn't really be able to eat there too much, even though I love it. All right, oligopolies are another pretty common type of market structure that we have. So if you think back to government class where we talked about monarchies and oligarchies, a monarchy is ruled by one person, like a king or a queen. An oligarchy is when you have 2 or 3 people ruling a country. Oligopolies are not that different, but from a business perspective. So this is a market structure where you've got usually 2 to 4 big businesses that control a market. And so with this, you can think about drugstores as a good example, right? So we have CVS, Rite Aid, Walgreens, and so they are all in competition with one another. But since there's so few businesses, generally they're able to kind of work together on their prices. If you go to a Walgreens and look at a bottle of Advil there, then that same bottle of Advil is probably going to cost about the same at Rite Aid, right? Instead of competing and undercutting each other on prices, they're able to set their prices a little bit higher. So we call this collusion, all right? And on a certain level, this is illegal, all right? That way people aren't fixing prices and getting overcharged for goods. All right, and so for this reason, you could look at cell phone service providers as a good example here. All right, a couple years ago when Verizon and AT&T tried to merge together to form one company, the US government actually stopped it. And the reason for that is they were worried about price fixing. They were worried that there'd be such little competition that the cell phone service providers that remained would set their prices even higher. All right, illegal forms of this would be what we call a cartel. And so if you think about drug organizations, this is what you would see. So in countries where drugs are a bigger deal and they have these cartels, usually you don't have a lot of organizations. If you look at our current issues in Mexico, all right, there's 2 or 3 big drug cartels. All right, and it's actually not in their best interest to compete with one another. It's not in their best interest to undercut each other on prices. It's in their best interest to work together and set their prices higher. That way they can all make a lot more money. However, the more people you have enter this market, the more likely you are to see a price war. So when my wife bought her CRV last year, she had 10 or 15 different car dealerships in the middle of a price war. They were all undercutting each other. They were all trying to get her business. And so because of that, she was able to really drive down the price of this vehicle. But if she only had one car dealership as an option for her vehicle, chances are that price would have been a lot higher. So in oligopoly, you've got 2 or 3 big businesses in control of a market. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to keep that off before. All right, let's leave it off here so we have some time for our quiz, and then we'll call it a day. So go ahead and switch over to the Google Meet, and we'll be done.